March 21st, 1987. The California morning was clear and beautiful. The kind of morning that makes you believe nothing bad could possibly happen. Dean Martin was at his home in Beverly Hills when the phone rang. It was 10:47 a.m. He would remember that detail for the rest of his life, because that's the minute everything ended. The voice on the other end was official, measured, careful, military. Captain Dean Paul Martin had been piloting an F-4 Phantom II during a training exercise out of March Air Force Base. The jet had crashed into Mount San Gorgonio. There were no survivors. The impact had been catastrophic. They were sorry for his loss. Dean stood there holding the phone. He didn't drop it. He didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He just stood there, and something inside him that had been alive since 1917 simply stopped functioning. The receiver stayed pressed to his ear long after the line went dead. His housekeeper found him like that 20 minutes later, still standing, still holding the phone, staring at nothing. The funeral was held on March 28, 1987. Over 500 people attended. Frank Sinatra was there, though he could barely speak. The remaining Rat Pack members came. Hollywood came. The military came with full honors. They folded an American flag with precision and ceremony and handed it to Dean Martin. He took it. He nodded. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He looked like a man who had died, but whose body hadn't figured out yet. People gave eulogies. They talked about Dean Paul Martin, 35 years old, Air Force Reserve pilot, actor, athlete, father, son. They talked about his smile, his talent, his service to his country. They talked about how proud everyone was of him, how bright his future had been. Dean sat in the front row and heard none of it, because you can't hear anything when your heart has stopped beating. After the funeral, Dean went home, and he stayed there. Not physically. He still left the house, still appeared in public when he had to. But the Dean Martin that people had known for 50 years in show business was gone. In his place was something else. A ghost wearing Dean Martin's face, going through the motions of being alive without actually living. The years of silence. Before March 21st, 1987, Dean Martin was still performing occasionally, still making appearances, still capable of that trademark charm and effortless cool that had defined him for decades. After March 21st, he performed exactly twice more in his life, and both times, everyone who saw him wished he hadn't. The first performance was in September 1987, just 6 months after crash. It was at Bally's Casino in Las Vegas. Dean had signed a contract before his son died, and his people convinced him to honor it. He walked on stage looking 20 years older than he was. He forgot lyrics to songs he'd sung 10,000 times. He stopped mid-performance at one point and just stood there, staring out at the audience like he'd forgotten where he was or why he was there. Someone in the front row called out, "We love you, Dean." He looked in the direction of the voice and said, "Yeah." And it was the saddest single word anyone had ever heard. He walked off stage after 30 minutes. The show was supposed to be 90 minutes. Nobody asked for their money back. They'd witnessed something too painful for refunds. The second and final performance was in 1988, another Vegas show. This one was worse. He was drinking before he went on. He forgot entire verses. At one point, he stopped singing and said into the microphone, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." And he walked off. Dean Martin, who had performed through hangovers, heartbreaks, divorces, career ups and downs, who had performed the night after JFK died, who had performed through everything life threw at him, walked off stage and never came back. His friends tried to help. Frank Sinatra visited constantly. Shirley MacLaine tried to get him out of the house. His ex-wife Jean tried to be there for him. His other children tried to reach him. But grief had built a wall around Dean Martin that nobody could penetrate. He was polite. He was kind. He said all the right things. But he wasn't really there anymore. The man who had once filled rooms with laughter now sat in silence. The man who had been the coolest guy in every room now looked lost in his own home. His daughter Deanna said later that it was like watching someone die in slow motion. He ate less. He drank more. He stopped caring about anything. Music didn't matter. Movies didn't matter. Golf didn't matter. Nothing mattered because his son was dead, and that fact erased everything else. People who knew Dean before and after March 21st, 1987, said the difference was absolute. It wasn't that he was sadder or quieter. It was that he was fundamentally different, like grief had reached inside him and rearranged all his essential parts. The light behind his eyes was gone. The ease was gone. The joy was gone. What remained was a man going through the motions of existence without any interest in actually being alive. By 1993, Dean Martin was 76 years old and looked 90. He rarely left his house. He saw almost nobody. He spent his days watching television, drinking, and staring at photographs of his son. 6 years had passed since the crash. 6 years of living in a world that didn't make sense anymore. 6 years of waking up every morning and remembering all over again that his child was gone. The impossible moment. October 15th, 1993. Dean Martin was in Ashland, Oregon. He'd gone there at the insistence of his daughter Deanna, who was convinced he needed to get out of Los Angeles, needed a change of scenery, needed something to break the monotony of his grief. Ashland was small, quiet, far from Hollywood and all its memories. They'd rented a cabin outside town. The plan was to stay for 2 weeks. Dean didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be anywhere. But he loved his daughter, and when she asked him to come, he went because that's what fathers do. Even fathers who are dead inside. Even fathers who have buried their children and don't know how to be alive anymore. On the third day, Deanna convinced him to come into town. Just for lunch. Just to walk around. Just to do something other than sit in the cabin staring at the trees. Dean agreed because it was easier than arguing. They drove into Ashland's small downtown area, parked, and started walking toward a restaurant Deanna had chosen. The street was busy for a small town. Saturday afternoon. People out shopping, eating, enjoying the autumn weather. Dean walked beside his daughter, hands in his pockets, barely seeing anything. He'd gotten good at being physically present while mentally absent. His body could walk through a town while his mind stayed in 1987, replaying the phone call, the funeral, all the moments he'd never get back. Then he saw him, a man, about 40 years old, walking out of a bookstore across the street. Tall, lean, athletic build, dark hair with some gray, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying 2 books, walking with a posture Dean would have recognized anywhere, in any crowd, in any circumstance. Dean stopped walking. His breath caught. His heart, which had been barely functioning for 6 years, suddenly slammed against his ribs. It couldn't be. The man turned slightly, talking to someone behind him. A woman emerged from the bookstore, laughing at something he'd said. Then 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old. The man put his hand on the boy's shoulder, an affectionate, paternal gesture. The family started walking down the street, away from Dean. Deanna had walked a few steps ahead before she realized her father had stopped. She turned back. "Dad, you okay?" Dean didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was staring at a dead man. He was staring at his son. 6 years dead. 6 years buried. 6 years mourned. Walking down a street in Oregon with a family Dean had never met. "Dad." Deanna's voice was concerned now. She followed his gaze. Saw the man and his family walking away. Saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" "That man," Dean said. His voice sounded strange even to himself. Hollow. Shocked. "That man." "What man?" "Dad, you're scaring me." But Dean was already moving, not running, walking fast, purpose in his steps for the first time in 6 years. Moving toward the man who couldn't possibly be who he looked like. Moving toward an impossibility. Moving toward his dead son. Deanna followed, confused and worried. "Dad, where you going?" "Dad." The man and his family had turned a corner. Dean followed. His heart was pounding now. His hands were shaking. This wasn't possible. He knew it wasn't possible. Dean Paul Martin died on March 21st, 1987. The military told him. The funeral happened. The flag was folded. The grave was dug. But that walk, that posture, those shoulders, the way he moved. Dean had watched his son walk for 35 years. He knew that walk like he knew his own heartbeat. He turned the corner, and the family was there, about 20 feet ahead, stopped at a crosswalk waiting for the light. The man was saying something to his son, ruffling the boy's hair. The woman was holding the daughter's hand. A normal family. A happy family. A family that shouldn't exist. Dean walked toward them. Each step felt like moving through water. Each step brought him closer to a truth he couldn't begin to understand. 10 feet away. 5 feet away. The light changed. The family started to cross. Dean said, not loud, just his son's name, spoken the way he'd spoken it 1,000 times before, the way only a father speaks his child's name. The man stopped, mid-step, froze completely. The woman and children kept walking a few steps before realizing he'd stopped. The woman turned back. Michael? You coming? Michael. His name was Michael now. The man turned slowly. And for the first time in 6 years, Dean Martin looked into his son's eyes, face to face with the dead. They stared at each other. The street noise faded. The people disappeared. The world narrowed to just this moment, this impossible, devastating moment. Dean Paul Martin, or whoever he was now, looked exactly like he should look if he'd lived the past 6 years. Older, some gray in his hair, lines on his face, but alive, undeniably, unmistakably alive. Dad, he said quietly, one word, acknowledging everything, confirming the impossible. Dean couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His legs felt unstable. Behind him, Deanna had caught up and was staring at her brother, her dead brother, her impossible, alive, dead brother. Oh my God, Deanna whispered. Oh my God, Dean Paul. The woman, Michael's wife, looked confused. Michael, who are these people? Michael. Dean's mind caught on the name. His son's name was Michael now. His son had a wife who called him Michael. His son had children who didn't know he was Dean Paul Martin. His son had a whole life built on being someone else. Sarah. Dean Paul said to his wife, his voice strained. Can you take the kids home? I need to talk to these people. Who are they? Sarah asked, concern in her voice. Dean Paul looked at his father, at his sister, at the family he'd left for dead 6 years ago. It's complicated. Please, Sarah, take Alex and Emma home. I'll explain everything later. Sarah looked at her husband, at these strangers who'd made him go white as a sheet, at the tension crackling in the air. Michael, what's going on? Please, Dean Paul said again. She nodded slowly, called the children. Come on, guys. Dad needs to talk to these people for a bit. She looked back once as they walked away, troubled and confused. The three of them stood there on the sidewalk. Father, son, daughter. 2 alive people and 1 ghost who refused to stay dead. There's a park, Dean Paul said finally, 2 blocks from here. We should talk there. He started walking. Dean and Deanna followed. Nobody spoke. What do you say to a dead man? What do you say to a son who let you bury him? What words exist for this? The park was small, mostly empty on a Saturday afternoon. Dean Paul led them to a bench far from the playground, away from people. They sat, Dean in the middle, Deanna on one side, Dean Paul on the other, like they were still a family. Like 6 years of grief and lies and death hadn't happened. Dean Paul spoke first. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to explain this. Dean found his voice. It came out rough, broken. You're alive. Yes. The crash, the funeral, the flag, all of it. All staged, Dean Paul said. The military was involved. I had help, people who owed me favors. The crash was real. An unmanned plane hit the mountain. But I wasn't in it. I was already gone by then. Deanna was crying, silent tears streaming down her face. Why? Dean Paul, why would you do this? Do you know what did to Dad? Do you know what you put all of us through? Dean Paul looked at his hands. I know. You know? Deanna's voice rose. You know? We buried you. We mourned you. Dad hasn't been alive since that day. He stopped performing. He stopped living. He's been a ghost for 6 years because his son died. Except you didn't die. You just let us think you did. I had reasons, Dean Paul said quietly. What reasons? Dean asked. His voice was steady now, eerily calm. What reasons justify letting your family grieve you for 6 years? Dean Paul looked at his father, really looked at him, saw what 6 years had done. The aging, the brokenness, the death behind the eyes. And something in Dean Paul's face crumbled. The name, he said. I needed to escape the name. Why he disappeared. Dean Paul Martin stood up from the bench. He couldn't sit still for this conversation. He started pacing, hands in his pockets, trying to find words for something he'd never expected to have to explain. Do you know what it's like, he began, to be Dean Martin's son? Not just be your son, but to be Dean Martin's son. Dean didn't answer, just watched his dead child pace. I was 5 years old the first time someone told me I'd never be as good as you. 5. I was at a school play, playing a tree or something stupid, and afterward, a parent came up and said, "You're Dean Martin's boy, right?" Big shoes to fill. I was 5 years old and already failing to live up to your legacy. Dean Paul's voice was getting louder, more emotional. Every audition I went on as an actor, every role I tried for, every time I performed, it was always Dean Martin's son tries acting or Martin's boy attempts to follow in father's footsteps. Never Dean Paul Martin. Always Dean Martin's son. Like I was an accessory to you. Like my only identity was being related to you. I never asked you to live up to anything, Dean said quietly. You didn't have to ask. Dean Paul turned to face his father. Don't you understand? You didn't have to say a word. Your existence was the expectation. Dean Martin, the coolest man in America, the singer, the actor, the comedian, the legend. And then there was me. Try to be anything, try and make my own way. And everywhere I went, your shadow was already there. Deanna spoke up. We all dealt with that. All of us kids. Yeah, it was hard being Dean Martin's children, but we didn't fake our deaths. You don't understand, Dean Paul said. It was different for me. I tried to do what he did. I tried singing. I tried acting. I tried the whole entertainment thing. And I was decent at it. Not great. Not legendary. Just decent. And decent when you're Dean Martin's son means failure. Means disappointment. Means everyone comparing you and finding you lacking. He sat back down, deflated. So I joined the Air Force. I thought that would be different. That would be mine. Nobody could compare my flying to your singing. It was completely separate. And for a while, it worked. I was just Captain Martin. Nobody cared about my father when I was flying an F-4. You were a good pilot, Dean said. I was an adequate pilot, Dean Paul corrected. And that was enough. Until it wasn't. Until the press found out Dean Martin's son was flying fighter jets. And suddenly it was a story. Suddenly it was photo ops and interviews, and America's coolest dad has America's bravest son headlines. They made it about you again. Even my flying became about you. Dean Paul's hands were shaking. I was 35 years old, and I'd never done anything that was just mine. Everything I'd ever accomplished was filtered through being your son. Every success was just like his father. Every failure was not living up to the Martin name. I wasn't a person. I was Dean Martin's son. That's all I was. That's all I'd ever be. So you died, Deanna said flatly. That was your solution? To let us think you were dead. I couldn't just leave, Dean Paul said. Don't you see? If I just walked away, quit everything, moved away, you'd have found me. The press would have found me. It would have been a story. Dean Martin's son abandons family and career. I have still been Dean Martin's son, just the disappointing one who quit. The shadow would have followed me anywhere I went. He looked at his father. But death? Death breaks the chain. Dead men don't have expectations. Dead men don't have legacies to live up to. Dead men's fathers stop comparing them to themselves. I could finally stop being Dean Martin's son and just be someone else, anyone else. Someone who didn't carry your name like a weight around his neck. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Dean spoke. So you became Michael Peterson. I moved to Oregon, met Sarah at a coffee shop, She has no idea who I used to be. She knows me as Michael, an IT consultant who moved to Ashland to get away from the city. We got married. We had kids. Alex and Emma. They're 8 and 10. Good kids. Happy kids. Kids who don't know their father is dead or their grandfather is Dean Martin or any of it. What did you tell them about your family? Deanna asked. That I don't have one. That my parents died when I was young. That I was raised by relatives and lost touch with them over the years. They think I'm orphaned and alone. He looked at Dean, which is what I needed to be to finally breathe. Dean Paul continued. And for 6 years, it worked. I was just Michael. Just a guy. Nobody expected anything from me except to be a good husband and father. Nobody compared me to anyone. Nobody cared about my last name or my father's legacy or whether I was living up to anyone's expectations. I was free. At what cost? Dean asked quietly. At the cost of you, Dean Paul admitted. At the cost of the family. At the cost of letting you grieve me. I know what I did. I know what it cost. But Dad, I need you to understand I was drowning. Every day, I was drowning in expectations and comparisons and the weight of being your son. And this was the only way I could see to save myself. The cruelest truth. Dean stood up from the bench, walked a few steps away, stood with his back to his son and daughter. His voice, when it came, was so quiet they almost couldn't hear it. You have children now. Yes, Dean Paul said. Alex and Emma. 8 and 10 years old. Yes. Dean turned around, and the look on his face made Dean Paul physically recoil. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was something far worse. It was devastation. Pure, absolute devastation. You have children, Dean repeated. So let me ask you something. Can you imagine someone from the military calling you and telling you Alex died in an accident? Can you imagine going to his funeral? Can you imagine holding a folded flag and knowing you'll never see your son again? Can you picture it? Dean Paul's face went white. Dad. No, answer me. Picture it. Really picture it. Your son dead. Your boy gone. Every day for 6 years. Waking up and remembering he's gone. Every holiday without him. Every birthday he'll never have. Every moment of joy in your life poisoned by the grief of losing your child. Can you imagine it? Yes, Dean Paul whispered. Now, Dean continued, his voice shaking. Imagine that after 6 years of that grief, after 6 years of living in that hell, you see your son walking down the street, alive, with a family, with a whole life you knew nothing about. And you realize he chose that. He chose to let you grieve. He chose to break your heart and leave it broken because it was more convenient for him than having a difficult conversation about expectations. Tears were streaming down Dean's face now. You asked if I know what it's like to be Dean Martin's son? Let me tell you what it's like to be Dean Martin. It's knowing that your child hated being related to you so much that he preferred to make you think he was dead. It's knowing that your existence was so suffocating to him that he'd rather you spend 6 years in agony than spend another day being your son. It wasn't about hating you, Dean Paul said desperately. Then what was it about? Help me understand how my son, my boy who I love more than anything in this world, could stand at his own funeral and watch me bury him. Because there's no way you pulled this off without help. The crash had to be observed. The body had to be... What did I bury, Dean Paul? Dean Paul looked at the ground. It was an unclaimed body from a morgue. The crash was real enough that identification was impossible. The military falsified the records. I watched from a distance. I saw you at the funeral. I saw you take the flag. And yes, I saw what it did to you. And I left anyway. Deanna was sobbing now. How could you? Dean Paul, how could you watch Dad bury you and just walk away? Because if I'd stayed, if I'd revealed myself then, it would have all been for nothing, Dean Paul said. Don't you see? The whole point was to disappear. To be dead to Dean Martin and everything that name represented. If I'd backed out, I'd have still been trapped. I'd have still been drowning. So yes, I watched Dad cry at my funeral. Yes, I left him in grief. And yes, I've lived with that guilt every single day for 6 years. But you lived with it, Dean said coldly. You live with guilt. I live with death. Do you understand the difference? You felt bad about what you did. I felt like I died. Those aren't equivalent. Dean sat back down on the bench. He looked old now, older than 76. Older than anyone should look. You know what the worst part is? Dean said, I'd have let you go if you'd come to me and said, Dad, I can't do this anymore. I need to leave. I need to be someone else. I need to get away from the name and the expectations and all of it. I'd have let you go. I'd have been hurt. I'd have been sad. But I'd have understood. Because I love you. Because your happiness mattered more to me than anything else. Because you're my son. Dean Paul's face crumbled. I couldn't tell you. You wouldn't have understood. You didn't give me the chance, Dean said. You decided for me. You decided that your father couldn't handle the truth. So you gave me a lie instead. A lie that destroyed me. And you did it because it was easier for you. Not because it was necessary. Not because there was no other option. But because staging your death was simpler than having a hard conversation. That's not fair, Dean Paul protested weakly. Fair. Dean's voice rose. You want to talk about fair? I haven't performed in 6 years. I haven't enjoyed anything in 6 years. I haven't been alive in any meaningful sense in 6 years. Because my son died. Except he didn't. He just decided his father's grief was an acceptable price for his freedom. The silence stretched. Finally, Dean Paul asked, What happens now? Dean looked at his son. Really looked at him. This man who used to be his boy. This stranger wearing his dead son's face. This person who had loved him so little that he preferred to torture him than trust him. Now, Dean said, now you go back to your life. Go back to being Michael Peterson. Go back to your wife and your kids and your freedom. You paid for it. You paid for it with 6 years of my life. So enjoy it, Dad. No, Dean said firmly. You don't get to call me that anymore. You buried your father 6 years ago. You made that choice. Live with it. Dean stood up, looked at Deanna. Let's go. Deanna stood, looking between her father and brother. This can't be how this ends. We can't just walk away. Watch us, Dean said. He started walking, away from the park, away from his dead son, away from the cruelest revelation of his life. Deanna followed, looking back once at Dean Paul, who sat on the bench looking more broken than anyone she'd ever seen. But Dean didn't look back, because sometimes the deepest cruelty isn't in dying. It's in forcing someone to mourn you while you go on living. And some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive what cannot be repaired. Dean Martin returned to Los Angeles the next day. He didn't tell anyone what had happened in Oregon. Not Frank, not his other children, not anyone. What was there to say? My dead son is alive and chose to torture me for 6 years because he didn't like being my kid? Some truths are too painful to speak aloud. Deanna kept the secret too, though it haunted her. She'd occasionally bring it up with her father, gently suggesting they talk about it. Maybe reach out to Dean Paul, try to find some path forward. Dean would change the subject. The conversation was over. His son had made his choice. Dean had made his. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995, just over 2 years after seeing his son alive in Oregon. The official cause was acute respiratory failure, but everyone who knew him understood that he died in 1987, and his body had just taken 8 more years to figure out. At the funeral, Deanna half expected Dean Paul to show up, to come back from the dead a second time, to pay respects to the father he killed in every way that mattered. But he didn't. Michael Peterson stayed in Oregon with his family. Maybe he didn't even know Dean had died. Maybe he didn't care. Or maybe he understood that showing up would have been one cruelty too many. Years later, in 2009, a man matching Dean Paul Martin's description, older now in his 50s, was spotted at a small jazz club in Portland. Someone who claimed to have known Dean Paul in his military days swore it was him, but when approached, the man said his name was Michael Peterson, and he didn't know anyone named Dean Paul Martin. He was polite about it, said he got that a lot. People saying he looked like someone they used to know, Then he went back to listening to the music. Maybe it was him. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe Dean Paul Martin really did die in that crash on March 21st, 1987. And Michael Peterson is just someone who happens to look like him, walk like him, move like him. Maybe the resemblance is just coincidence. Or maybe some people get to die twice. Once for real and once for freedom. And the people who love them just have to live with both deaths. The story of Dean Martin and his son isn't about the joy of reunion or the power of forgiveness. It's about a different kind of truth, that sometimes the people we love hurt us in ways that can't be fixed. That freedom for one person can mean prison for another. That some choices, like letting your father grieve you for years while you live a happy life under another name, break things that can't be repaired. Dean Paul Martin or Michael Peterson or whoever he became wanted to be free of his father's shadow. And he got what he wanted. He got his freedom, his anonymity, his chance to be nobody in particular. The price was just his father's soul. And apparently, that was a price he was willing to pay. The legacy of the Martin name lives on. Dean's music still plays. His movies still run on television. His legend remains intact. But the man himself died twice. Once when his son crashed, and once when his son refused to come home. And the second death was so much worse than the first. Because at least when you bury someone, you know where they are. But when someone you love chooses to become a ghost while still alive, when they walk the earth with a different name, and pretend you never existed, you're left with something worse than grief. You're left with abandonment, betrayal, the knowledge that you weren't worth the truth. March 21st, 1987, the day Dean Paul Martin staged his death. October 15th, 1993, the day Dean Martin discovered his son was still alive. Christmas Day, 1995, the day Dean Martin finally got to join his son in death. 3 dates, 3 devastations, 3 moments that prove that sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone isn't leaving them. It's letting them think you're gone while you go on living somewhere they'll never find you. That's not survival. That's not freedom. That's murder by another name. Because Dean Martin didn't die of respiratory failure. He died of a broken heart. A heart broken by a son who loved his own freedom more than he loved his father's life. And that's a pain that doesn't heal. Not in 6 years. Not in a lifetime. Not ever.